Please note that this video contains spoilers for the subject and the series and/or franchise leading up to this entry. Put off by how long this video is? Don't worry, I try to jam-pack my videos with as much content and as much detail as I possibly can. Anything I feel I can comment on and that I feel you might be interested in, I pretty much put in the video. I try not to repeat myself and talk fairly fast. I either have or will cover other parts of this franchise, and this video either is or will be linked below. I'm not going to restate here what I did or will say in the other video. These videos get long enough as it is. Thor Thoughts. And I am indeed standing up again. I'm going to try to be standing for most of these. It's really only when I have an absurd amount of notes. You know, I had like 56 pages for the Lost review, and I don't remember 10, 12, 20 something for Married with Thrilling Thoughts, but these this one I only have 6. So, and I apologize, I probably sounded bored and or as if I were starting to fall asleep in certain parts, especially near the end of the Lost video. I assure you neither of those were the case, but yeah, that's why I stand up. The moment you sit down, unless you're like typing or playing a video game or something, just the energy just dies. The moment you're standing up, you're still, yeah, yeah. So, I should briefly say that to continue sparing my wrists to spoil the chance. Anyway, right. In order to continue sparing my wrists, I'm doing all of my notes as voice typing through Google plus Google Docs voice typing. And if anyone is in a similar situation to mine, yeah, it works really well. But there are certain words that it will not. I don't know. It gets Loki, it gets Asgard, but it can't get Thor. For some reason, it always comes up as Thor. So instead, I just said Chris, as in Chris Hemsworth. And I'm gonna try to remember to always translate it back to Thor when I read the notes. But in case I say Chris instead of Thor, yeah, if I'm saying Chris in this video, I'm almost definitely talking about Chris Hemsworth, and really I'm talking about Thor. But yeah, it's faster to say Chris than Chris's character, or Chris's character in the movie that I'm talking about. And I believe that covers everything that, yes, so that does not cover everything. That doesn't actually, I suppose I should probably give this a, let's see, if I, yes, I'm going to go ahead and call this intro. And there we go. Excuse me, I just have to check. There we go. My whiteboard for noting timecodes is on, I forget what it's called, but the kind of, you know when like someone's painting something, they put not the thing they're painting directly on, but the thing they have to secure it. It kind of looks like a tripod. That's what I've got it on, and it needs to hold the whiteboard firmly in place, and sometimes I need to, yeah. So I'm going to do videos on all Phase 1 movies that I've got more to say about. Originally, I was going to do Iron Man 1 and The Incredible Hulk, but upon rewatching those videos, the ones I already did on those movies, I found that most of it I have said, and the little bit there's left I'm gonna put in the relevant spots of these videos. Excuse me. I think... helps a little bit. I don't suppose I could... Excuse me. And this thing. That's right, I forgot, but this was how I did it last time. That I was standing and using the laptop for notes. I apologize, I realize this isn't exactly absolutely tantalizing to watch. And apologies for that. Push the camera any. Okay. That's better. That's a lot better. So, where was I? Yes. Yeah, most of it I have already said, or failing that other people have said. And that's... I don't think I've actually said that on camera, but I have decided that I'm going to... If someone else explains something really well, I'm not necessarily going to... I'm probably not going to restate it. I'm only going to bring up what someone else said if I really have some major argument against it, or if what they said was buried deep within a video where they said a lot of things that didn't make any sense, or a video that wasn't labeled the thing they were talking about. So, yes. Yeah, so most of it I have said, but the rest of the Phase 1 movies I will be doing individual videos on. At least that is the plan right now. And I was intending to do them in order. I was intending to do... And for the rest of this, they will be in order. Unless this happens again. I am depending on the library to rewatch these, you know. So, you know, Iron Man 2 is at the library, but Thor was, like, lent out to someone, so, loaned, whatever. I think you know what I'm saying. And as such, I was like, well, in that case, I better reserve it immediately, so that when it is... Excuse me. I had in fact not taken a picture of... I'll do it later. Yeah, so I figured I better reserve it immediately, so that, you know, when it is ready, I will be able to... Let's see. I will immediately be able to... Yeah, so that I won't suddenly be stuck without being able to do it before. You know, some of these MCU movies get extremely popular, especially building up to, you know, I'm not the only person who figures, hey, let me just go rewatch the other MCU movies before the new one comes out. So, yes, that's why I'm doing this one before Iron Man 2. But other than this, I intend to do them in the correct order. When I first watched the Phase 1 movies, really, Iron Man 1 and the Avengers were the only two that really blew me away. But rewatching the other ones in preparation for watching the later MCU films, which I've done for a lot of these, several of these, some of these, I've come to appreciate them much more. And honestly, I don't think there's been a single bad movie in the MCU yet. Just some underwhelming ones, such as Iron Man 2 and Thor 2 and 3. And once again, I do really love Thor 1 and 2. And there's a lot to love about Thor 3, but it's also a movie that has some issues that I really wish that it didn't have. Anyway, which I go into in the video I did on that. So in these videos, the ones I'm recording between now and Infinity War coming out, I'm going to try to talk about the aspects of them that I think are especially smart, or in some cases, not as, but, you know, with the right intentions and such, and yeah. So, that brings us, there we go, that's kind of loud, isn't it? There we go. That brings us to unrelated to review. Now, recently Wesley Snipes talked about being willing to do a role in the MCU. Blade or another character, and I forget who mentioned it. I watched so many of these videos, but he said he didn't want Blade 4. Me neither. What I do want is Blade the series, season 2 and onwards, but I realize that's probably not going to happen. That's, 10 years and all. You could maybe do it with a movie, but television shows that have been off the air for that long don't necessarily get another chance. And I'm not sure Blade, I forget if it was very popular with viewers. I would like to see him in the MCU, and given that vampires in the Blade universe try to stay hidden, I think they could more or less get away with saying, they've been around the whole time. Whatever trail they leave behind probably looks like serial killers, groups of murderers, which by itself is not really something the various heroes in the MCU, at least the movies, I haven't watched any of the shows, have really been seen to deal with. I'm not saying they don't care, but that's not necessarily what they're especially, equipped to deal with or sent after. In Civil War, we see that the Avengers, actually, yeah, I guess that's even, it's because it is, I always get his name wrong, Brock Rumlow, I think, more than, yeah, because they don't actually know for sure what the target is, although they're fairly certain. Anyway, yeah. Now, I haven't yet talked about him possibly being Black Panther. With both the Black Panther movie and the Wonder Woman movie, I'm torn. Obviously, they should have been made decades ago for representation. However, I love both movies and how they turned out, and they couldn't have come out in the form they did if they had come out much sooner than they did. I mean, Black Panther builds directly on Civil War. The Wonder Woman is in response to the other, the previous DCEU movies. And yeah, they build on what came before them in their respective continuities. I'm not sure Wesley Snipes would have been good for the less intense moments of T'Challa as Black Panther, which in the final film are most of them. But if you played another generation's Black Panther, that I could see. And, I mean, he has proven to be an excellent actor in at least some of his roles. I think people who think of him mostly as, he's Blade, he's, Simon Simon Phoenix in, Demolition Man and stuff like that. They think of him purely as that. He can play very different characters from those characters quite well. But, you know, obviously it should be a role where he can use his martial arts, which is why, you know, Blade and Black Panther make a lot of sense for him. And I greatly appreciate he put a lot of efforts into trying to get a Black Panther movie, you know, in the works. And while his version didn't end up, you know, on the silver screen, didn't end up being produced, I do think that that showed that there was a passion for the character, and it's possible that we wouldn't have gotten him at all if not for, you know, Snipes' you know, attempts at. And there's also been talk of the X-Men joining the MCU, which I also have not talked much about, but for that, it would probably basically have to try to do something similar to the original 2000 X-Men movie. You know, regular people are gradually becoming more aware that mutants exist, even though they've probably been around at least for decades. They would have to acknowledge it with something like that. They could not pretend they were just something everybody knew about. It would have come up in one of these movies, for sure. And I do think, you know, if they wanted to retcon Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch into being mutants, you could say that the experiment simply enhanced their mutation, you know, brought the mutation out in them, which was dormant or something. You know, recessive. Oh, that's why the other test subjects did not survive. Sorry, some of these voice type notes I don't always get around to checking, and some of them it really gets very wrong what I was saying. But anyway, that's why the other test subjects did not survive. They were not mutants, which I guess makes it somewhat like the machine Magneto built in the first movie. And moving on, notes taken while watching. This and The Incredible Hulk both have great deleted scenes on their DVDs, and this one only has, like, I forget, 6 minutes maybe or something. The Incredible Hulk has like 47 minutes worth, which is like half the movie's length. You know, in both cases, I kind of wish that they were part of the theatrical cut. I can see how they maybe, you know, the pacing maybe didn't work out quite as well. Certainly, in both of them, there's stuff that the deleted scenes set up that you have the payoffs to in the final movie, and you know, with most of it, it is just less, you know, there's a deleted scene that really sets up Sif and the Warriors 3 really well. And instead, you know, in the movie, it is like, you know, the first time you see, you know, I think Sif's introduction is fine. You know, it's you know, basically she's looking at Thor being a show-off, and she's like, oh, please, you know, and I mean, yeah, that kind of sets up that, you know, she's not afraid to speak her mind, and yeah, I think that's fine. But the Warriors 3, the first time we see them, it's just that they're standing there smiling at Thor, where in the deleted scenes you actually see them exhibit their personality traits, which are in the movie, but they're not, you don't have a really strong introduction to them in the final movie, the way that you know, really, yeah. So, but yeah, The Incredible Hulk would be really long if they did add in all the deleted scenes. You know, we are talking like 2.5 hours or so, which for that movie is maybe a bit long. You know, I don't think, I love that the Avengers movies, so far at least, and the Civil War movie are 2.5 hours, because there's so much there. There's so many characters and so many developments. But really, The Incredible Hulk, again, I love the movie, but I don't think it would have, I think it being that long would have been too much. And I do also think a lot of the stuff cut, they did fine to, like, cover that it was cut. Like in the deleted scenes, you actually see the guy saying, you know, that the guy with the glasses that lets Bruce use the computers because he brought pizza. In the final film, he just holds up a slice of pizza and he's like, you know, yeah, thank you, you know. In the movie, you actually see him greeting Bruce, and it's a funny little scene, but you don't really need it. And yeah, there are a lot of those little scenes where people talk about things that happened on screen, and those conversations culminate in the characters learning some information where that in the final film you just realize, oh, okay, you know, you don't see in the final film Betty and Bruce talking about how, you know, all the information was deleted from the servers, but you know, just you the movie, the theatrical cut does get across. Obviously, they did have that conversation. Now, moving on. Excuse me. Now, in the notes that I took before I watched, I talked about some of the things that put this movie at a bit of a disadvantage. And yeah, I'm going to get into those when I get to that part, but I put this here. As much time as this movie spends away from Asgard, this movie does convey Thor's origin story, which, yeah, you know, in a lot of the early comics, Asgard wasn't that much. It was Thor on Earth, you know, and sometimes he'd fight like aliens and such, but it was Thor on Earth. So you can only do so much to, you know, other than that, they basically have to not be telling the origin story, not be starting with the origin story. And I'll get more into detail on that in the notes I took before watching, so you know, that's what you really want to hear, skip to that section. But they definitely needed to do something like this. So, which again, as I'm going to get into, doesn't mean that they could not at all have done a better job, but they needed to do some. And you know, the movie shows what Thor looks like from a human perspective, which is incredibly important. And moments after we see Loki, it cuts to the treasure room, and frost giants break in, subtly connecting the two in the audience's mind. I'm not saying that the movie should have had 2003 Daredevil movie-style sense vision, but it needed to do more to establish the powers of these of the Asgardians, outside of the ones we see them use to fight. How did Odin send the frost giants? Sense the frost giants, sorry. Yeah, some of these, like I said, didn't type exactly what I said. And yeah, others have mentioned this, but related. How exactly is the destroyer controlled? It clearly, near the end, Loki can hear what Thor is saying to it. And so we're left wondering, does he control the destroyer? I mean, it seems Loki doesn't express the destroyer doing something that he didn't want it to. So there must be some connection between the two. But is it a sentient being that he has some sort of control over? Or is it like a robot that needs someone to pilot it, and Loki is doing so with his mind? That was really something that needs to be, you know, it does, when Thor beats up the destroyer, does that, can Loki feel, you know, yeah, feel the pain that it feels, if, yeah. And when Heimdall says, you know, no enemy, before this, no enemy has escaped his sight, and later they say he can hear everything. Maybe just briefly show us what that looks like, because it's a difficult concept to comprehend. Does he use it all the time? Does he ever choose not to listen in, such as like when people are having sex or the like? And, comparatively, by the end of the movie, we understand how it sounds to Heimdall when someone yells for him from another dimension, because we see him as he's hearing Thor yell out for help. So, which also is it like, Thor went directly. Thor went directly to where he arrived from. Does that mean that if he hadn't, Heimdall wouldn't have been able to hear him? Can he not? Can no wait, yeah, I think in Ragnarok it's basically established early on that if you call for the person, that when it's not Heimdall, it's Scourge, I want to say his name is, that he can hear you no matter where you are if you call directly for him. So, which again is something that would be, yeah. And the fact that Odin can hear, can tell what's going on around him. Laufey says that near the very end, but before then, we don't know that that's the case. And it does, like, yeah, is he just completely knocked out? Or does he have some idea of what's going on around? Just, yeah. And the Frost Giants make good use of ice and ice shards, icy cold, the like, as weapons and attacks. And in the fight in Jotunheim, Thor doesn't even really know. He doesn't even really notice that when his allies are hurt, and they say we must go, and he's like, so go. And at the end of the movie, the idea of other people getting hurt is the main motivation for his actions when the destroyer arrives, and he's willing to sacrifice himself to save the friends that he, in Odin's words, couldn't protect, and to save the humans that he started out thinking as beneath him. When he first realizes he's on Earth, he's like, oh, I can't believe this, it's, I mean, he's not like, oh, thank goodness it's not Niflheim or Jotunheim, Although obviously it's not Jotunheim, it doesn't look like anything like Jotunheim, but yeah, he's yeah. And minutes after he easily beats up dozens of frost giants, he's rendered unconscious several times, tased, injected with anesthetic and such. A very humbling circumstance. And it is also, we needed something to show for sure, no, really, he does not have his powers. And near the end of the movie, he's serving food to his friends. At the start of the movie, he was encouraging people to applaud him. And I appreciate that his growth in this movie is actually, actually carries over. He's not full of himself in the next several movies. Donald Blake, the Doctor, Jane's ex in this, and the, assumed identity that they used to, to get him out of S.H.I.E.L.D. custody, is Thor's actual original character that Thor was the alter ego of. So it's a cute reference that he's posing as him. And when you see Odin with baby Loki, and baby Loki changes his skin color to match Odin's, I guess the idea is that either of them is intentionally changing it so that he'll fit in, but again, that is something, is Odin doing that so that he can hide this child? Is the child doing it because it wants, like, it's trying to live up to the expectations of, I mean, it might realize that that's not its father, but I mean, he picked it up off the ground, so he's not, he could have left it there if he didn't want. So there's clearly, this is someone who might treat him well, so that you could say that, the baby is trying to, Or you could say that it's Loki trying to, even back then, he was like being deceptive or such. That this is, regardless of which of those it is, it's arguably a pretty strong character moment. But for who? Who did what exactly and why? It's just, it's not something that would be difficult to just. Odin is already giving a lot of, like, he says, there was a baby. Just to, when it saw me, it almost instinctively changed its skin color to match mine. Just that's all. Or have Loki, you know, we it's possible that Odin says more than what we hear him say. So that he says what we're seeing to Loki, and Loki could, ask, was it you or I who changed the baby's skin color or something? Yeah. Now, I think that, an argument could be made that maybe Jotunheim should attempt an attack. They're not even really considering it, other than agreeing with Loki to assassinate Odin. But of course, they're not interested in war. They just want the casket back. And both of the sneak attacks they go through with make sense for that purpose. I love that the picture Darcy takes of Thor for Facebook is the one they put on the fake ID. Selvig could easily be a really boring character, the old scientist guy who's not intentionally funny, but him caring so much about Jane and protecting her from Thor, who, if it Thor could really derail Jane, and Selvig realizes this. So yeah, and Thor also acknowledges it in the bar scene. But yeah, him caring so much makes Selvig compelling, and he has some experience with S.H.I.E.L.D. In Iron Man, there's a gradual build to the reveal of S.H.I.E.L.D., which, to the average moviegoer is like, they're like, what is this thing that they're constantly doing, to comic book fans, it's like, so how much power does S.H.I.E.L.D. have? What stage are they at? And people watching this movie, especially considering Iron Man 2, do know them, and Selvig's the character in this movie who knows them, because obviously they're not common knowledge, and you need a character in there telling Jane, you don't understand, S.H.I.E.L.D. is really powerful, and they're gonna, yeah, it's not, yeah, you have to be careful with, yeah. I love that Darcy hears Mjolnir and thinks Mjolnir, like, cutesy cat name, surrounded by characters who talk mythology and science, both of them deep. She'll every so often keep it from becoming too heavy by saying something about Facebook or iPod or the like. Her iPod or the like. The Asgardian costumes and sets are the kind of things that a lot of people could find very hard to take seriously, and I've only seen clips of, I want to say it's called The Incredible Hulk Returns or something, the movie that used the cast from the Incredible Hulk TV series, and also had Thor, and yeah, in those clips, I don't think it looked very good, and maybe it was the best they could do back then on their budget, or but sometimes you then have to just say, can we maybe just hold off on doing this until technology improves, until maybe try to get together more money to use as for the budget, and I mean, there are some things where you should just say, this is, yeah, there are probably movies where they were like, we can't make this now because we don't have the technology. Certainly there are movies where when they made it, they realized this is when we can make it because we have the technology. So, yeah. But yeah, I appreciate that this doesn't tone them down. It finds the right look for them because, again, this is something that could easily look really, really bad. And there are people who do say that it looks bad. I don't think so. I think it has the majestic feel that it's supposed to. I mean, if you were a god, don't you think you would wear stuff like that? If you thought you could pull off wearing a cape, you would do it. You're not going to convince me otherwise. And a lot of people have already discussed the helmets. I don't really have anything to add to that discussion. I don't feel like it's been said. Anyway, I appreciate that this doesn't tone them down and isn't constantly making fun of them. It plays them straight, wears them on its sleeve. Within minutes of the movie starting, we're seeing mythical beings fighting Asgardians. We're seeing ice powers, etc. So some of it is even front-loaded. The audience is either going to adjust to it or completely lose interest in the film. Of course, not long after, we get Darcy, and a lot of the audience are not going to be Darcy, even if they're not into this sort of movie necessarily, but they probably know a Darcy. So, yeah, Darcy's there to even things out. Yeah, I think that's one way. I realize it would make for a much smaller action scene, and maybe it's intentional, maybe it's supposed to be, but Thor would be horrible at stealth games. The first guy he knocks out, immediately discovered. Branagh does perhaps go a bit hard on the Dutch angles. I don't think I wasn't always completely willing to admit that, but yeah, it is maybe a little much. Maybe more than a little. Even when there are a ton of them, the characters in the MCU movies tend to get a decently even amount of lines. A lot of movies that have a lot of characters don't get that right, and that's, yeah, a scene like this was something I noted when Heimdall asks, that Heimdall requires their presence, and they walk up, and he's like, so you would do this? And yes, good. And then he walks off. I cannot, defy my king. And as he's walking off, Fandral says, complicated fellow, isn't he? And in the scene right before it, Volstagg had a line, and Sif had a line. I don't think Hogan did, but Hogan is a man of few words. So if he was always talking, it wouldn't have that effect on, and yeah, so they're constantly, a lot of movies would have it be like, I'd have to say of the four characters, Sif and the Warriors 3, Sif is probably the most commanding and like the driving force. Like, she's the one who takes charge. So a lot of movies would have her being the person who was constantly, it could easily have been her yelling at Volstagg for eating so much, calling Heimdall a complicated fellow, and all this, and instead, by spreading them out, everyone gets to, yeah. And there's a deleted scene that points out that Hogan almost never smiles, but he smiles when they find Thor on Earth, and this is similar to a thing in Doctor Strange, this solo film, where a character will eventually show emotion that early on he seems unwilling to or incapable of. And this movie uses Loki's powers of holographic projections and such, and his ability to manipulate really well. I really like when Loki goes up to Heimdall and he said, and they have the brief conversation, and Loki uses the Casket of Ancient Winters to freeze Heimdall, and then he hides the casket again and walks further, and until you realize that, until he unhides the casket And I think even past that point, for some people, you don't realize that he's holding it at all. And that's the idea. If he walked up to Heimdall holding the casket of ancient winters, Heimdall would have drawn his sword immediately, you know, and or taking cover from Loki using the casket. But in reality, I think it looks as though Loki is carrying the scepter or something, but so Heimdall doesn't suspect anything. And once Loki is close enough and Heimdall realizes and starts to draw a sword, Loki immediately uncovers the casket, uses it, and then covers it again. Because if you're holding that thing out in the open, you know, it's not made to be something that you can just hide like that. So it would need someone with Loki's powers of the, yeah, holographic. We don't see a lot of it, but we do get a sense of Warriors 3, Sif, Loki, and Thor all fight in different ways, and Odin a little bit, mostly in the prologue. Laufey's little ice dagger is pretty rad. I'm not going to say cool. In this, Thor puts his hammer on Loki as one of the last things he does. In Ragnarok, he threatens to hit him with it as one of the first things he does. In both cases, it's because Loki isn't worthy of the hammer that that maneuver works. And at the end, Jane and the others are working with S.H.I.E.L.D. You know, they say, we have the S.H.I.E.L.D. satellite codes, making it obviously a lot easier to do their work, which is also, you know, the post-credits scene. It's not clear how much time has passed between the last scene and the post-credits scene, but we do have that thing of, you know, he says the Foster theory. So she, you know, she published a scientific thesis and it was recognized between the time. That's my read of that line anyway. And let's see, yeah, now the movie is 102 minutes not counting the end credits and 110 counting them. Notes taken before rewatching. And I am, let's see, about to enter page 4 of 6, I think. Yes, diving directly into it. This movie had a very difficult balance to master. I'm not saying that it couldn't have been done better, but it did a pretty good job, and I don't think everybody acknowledged that. The interesting thing about Thor is that he fights aliens and goes to planets and stuff like that. But the first Avengers movie was obviously going to be set on Earth. And this film came after 2 Iron Man movies and an Incredible Hulk movie. They have outlandish stuff, but everything is tied to Earth. It's not as though, say, the Venom symbiote was in one of those movies. You know, Spider-Man 3, we've had 2 movies set entirely on Earth, and we have the Venom symbiote. You know, you could argue that it still doesn't fit in, but we have had pretty out there. Yeah, really, it really. I'm sorry, I'm not going to get into the 3rd Spider-Man movie. I've as much fun as that movie is to tear into. I've done so, and others have done so. Anyway, in that movie, we have you know, if they had made a Spider-Man 4 and there had been some kind of space stuff in that, you know, having Troopers flashbacks, you could say, well, the 3rd one had the Venom symbiote, which came from space, you know. If there had been space stuff in one of these movies before this, you know, yeah, you could maybe have. But, yeah. We have to establish what Thor is to Earth, how aliens could interact with the then very Earth-based MCU. If this whole movie barely had Earth, excuse me, you have a couple of problems. First off, people who aren't sold on aliens in the MCU would check out. That's why it starts on Earth, and after a brief outer space adventure, which is entirely focused on Thor, we return to Earth. Note how short the prologue actually is. There's a lot of a lot of important stuff happens in it, but it's actually extremely short. And then we go, back to Thor, and then, and yeah, it's still not on Earth, but it's based on Thor, so the audience kind of, we latch on to Thor. Okay, so whatever happens next, it's about him, and he is like, if you take away the god stuff, the king stuff, he's fairly relatable. A lot of kids grow up thinking, I'm gonna kick so much ass, I'm gonna be awesome when I grow up, and then they grow up and they have to learn not to just immediately, just go and pick any fight that just, even, Odin sees it clearly. Yes, this was dangerous, but we stopped it. It was only a few. We can't go to war over 2 of their people trying, this. That's just not how, you can't, they have an agreement, they have a truce, so that, and that's also, of course, something that this movie doesn't necessarily establish as much, but, there are a ton of other kingdoms that, if they don't feel like Asgard is a place that's ruled by someone who doesn't just start a war over any little thing, yeah, and that is something, I feel like the second Thor movie does a pretty good job of establishing that people need to look to Asgard and depend on them, not just waging war over absolutely nothing. So, yeah. Now, but yeah, we get attached to Thor, and we want to see him grow as a character, and he's also just, he's fun, he's charming, he's not a boring character. But yeah, after a brief outer space adventure entirely focused on Thor, we return to Earth. Second, if Thor had not been to Earth before the Avengers movie, then it's just another planet he might visit. He'd have no emotional stakes in saving the planet. Yes, officially he's supposed to care about all the planets, all 9 realms, but he doesn't know any farmers, and the aspect of the Asgardians doing Team America-style universe policing, while not contradicted here, really wasn't clear until the second movie. And they also needed to deal with the Rainbow Bridge. If this movie ended with it intact, well, why doesn't the Asgardian army help the Avengers? Failing that, at least a small group, maybe the Warriors 3, and, to answer why they aren't in the Avengers, Odin only had, what is it, he says, the dark magic. He only had just barely enough dark magic to transport Thor to Earth. One-way trip and only one god. So, yeah. And let's see. But yeah, really, every movie that's about vigilantes has the issue of, why isn't this person, say, a cop in the military or something? Why is he doing it on his own? And a lot of them go with, let's see, they clean up. They do what the cops and the military can't. But the moment you involve a kingdom like Asgard, you genuinely do have to explain that. Because what do they exist for if not to stop invasions? And, comparatively, obviously, someone like Iron Man is far better equipped than the military to stop an invasion. And the second movie does talk about, why, does Iron Man share the tech, or does he keep it to himself, and this whole thing. And let's see, there's something else I was gonna get into. Thor needs to have some sympathy for Earth and some kind of, this was what it was. Basically, all three Thor movies do have just briefly, comparatively, the second Avengers movie, it's not really. Oh yeah, I mean, there's some universe kind of stuff involved, but other than that, Ultron is a human creation, and the fact that, by the time that the Asgardians might realize that, Ultron is actually threatening to kill all life on Earth, by then they would just barely have time to assemble their forces and send them to Earth before the Avengers had already dealt with it. And then, of course, have the issue, how much is... Yeah, never mind. There's one other thing. Yeah, the various... The Thor solo movies do have to explain why is Thor on his own and or with, like, the Warriors 3 and such. And, why isn't the army with him? And, yeah, the movies all do explain that. And I understand why some people found it underwhelming, but yeah, at the end of the day, we don't go to these movies to see the military saving the day. If we wanted to see the military saving the day, there are tons of other movies we could watch. I mean, can the military rock a cape? Do they have, multicolored armor that covers the entire body? I think not. Yeah, the military don't have Iron Man tech except for War Machine, which Tony built on his own. The weapons added onto it would not be enough to stop the invasion. And let's see. You could argue that Thor would still intervene in the Avengers, the first solo movie, since Loki is the one invading. But I'm not sure they decided that Loki would be before this movie did well. This movie showed us that Loki would be a compelling villain. And the Avengers do work for S.H.I.E.L.D. Thor comes to trust S.H.I.E.L.D. in this movie. And I think that... Yeah, it was a good idea to have Thor come to Earth at least... at least once, and spend some time here to appreciate that it's not, at the start, it's not a realm he thinks very highly of. And, which, I mean, we put on far better stage plays than, but maybe that's just Loki, who's a bad writer for that kind of thing. In the Avengers solo movie, the only person we see asked to trust S.H.I.E.L.D. is Bruce. Tony and Thor have already met them, not under the best of circumstances, but they have seen that they are the good guys. And let's see. And Steve works for the military, so he works for, I guess, yeah, he's recruited for S.H.I.E.L.D. at the start of it, but yeah, he accepts. I mean, he has some underlying faith in the U.S. government, the U.S. military. I haven't read much new Thor. Most of what I've read was the original stuff, and that is probably where they took some inspiration that is also very Earth-based. Originally, Thor wasn't even the main persona. He was the outlandish alter ego of Dr. Donald Blake, the human character. I'm grateful they took that out. It was originally in the script, and maybe that was why Thor thought it would work to get to and touch the hammer. That's how it works in those comics. He's not Thor if he spends too long not holding Mjolnir. You know, IMDb Goose points out that it's a plot hole. Thor has the ability to summon Mjolnir from distance when it is in his possession, when he is worthy. He should have known that if he could not summon it from the town or from any other closer location, traveling towards the crater, he will not be able to take it from the crater also. And yeah, I think that's maybe they originally had it there, had him figure, well, I need to get to, as long as I pick it up again, I'll turn back into Thor, like the last time I picked it up. But then he was, or maybe it's a reference to that, but when you really think about it, it doesn't make that much sense. I mean, does that mean that if he, like, loses his hammer on another planet and then, like, leaves, forgets about it, and comes back, that he can't, get his hammer to return to him without first finding it on the new planet, without just being close? Yeah. This movie, and to a lesser extent the other Thor movies and other cosmic Marvel, doesn't always give a good idea of what someone's powers and limitations are, dealing with these alien beings who look human but aren't. All three Thor solo movies have too many major characters, especially Asgardians. They're there in the comics, and like with the X-Men movies, they included them rather than combining or cutting down. You can have a huge cast in a monthly comic that runs for years, decades sometimes. You can't in a movie series where you may only get 3 solo films and they'll be years apart. I'm not saying that the other ones could have, but this is the only Phase 1 film that is the first in its series to show the kind of action we want from the titular character very, very early on. Thor's using Mjolnir, striking lightning, doing the classic hammer moves, 20 minutes in or less. And you could argue that it takes away Thor's stuff too soon and for too long, but it does give you a taste of it early on. Again, I just rewatched the first Iron Man movie. I forget, but I think it's maybe 40 or 50 minutes into the movie before he puts on the Mark I suit. That's, consider, it's what we're there for. Again, I'm not saying that they should have had, like, one of the Iron Man action scenes be, like, immediate and then say, oh, and so many days earlier, this and this happened. And then the rest of it play on from there. A major problem with the action in this one is that it's only really Thor-style action at the very start and at the very end. And at the very end, it's very small. Excuse me, he very easily defeats Destroyer, which is also, we've just had a scene with the Destroyer, By the time Thor fights it, we are pretty ready for that scene to end, First he arrives on Earth and blows up some shield vehicles. Then he goes towards the town, and the Warriors 3 and Sif fight him. Then he attacks some human, stores and such. Thor agrees to go towards him, and Thor talks to him, and thus Loki, and then it attacks him, and then Thor gets his powers back. At that point, we're ready for the Destroyer thing to end, But it does also mean we don't get really that cool of an action scene between, and that's again something where I feel like the other ones do a better job giving a really big, yeah. Now, yes, and the fight between him and Loki is personal. It's about Bifrost rather than using powers. And the major Thor one is minutes after we see the prologue. We've just seen magic and fighting between aliens. and again, I did write this before I realized just how, excuse me, just how short the prologue is. But yes, you have my permission to laugh at that. But the physical thing there. However, it is still something where, yeah. Here's what I would do. Put Thor's action scene around the middle. Maybe even remove him beating up S.H.I.E.L.D. personnel. That's an okay scene, but it's not really what we want from Thor. You know, I mean, really, it shows that even without powers, he's a good fighter. And that's not bad, but we don't need a whole scene dedicated to it. I mean, later on, you see that he can still drink. He drinks Selvig under the table, and then carries him all the way home. You know, it's not with ease. You know, he's not like exhausted from that. You know, you don't need a scene showing that he can still beat people up. We can deduce that from the fact that he carries Selvig with such ease. Anyway, have it be him telling Jane why he was cast out, just before he goes for the hammer, in place of him beating them up. Just have him manage to sneak past all of them. That's what he does at the very start of the scene anyway. And then he's discovered when he grabs the hammer, or right before, when he takes the last few steps to get to it. You know, you could still have the Hawkeye cameo there, which is golden. And you know, yeah, in order to cut it out from the start, simply cut from either the Bifrost sequence or them just landing to them being back. The audience would then be excited to find out what happened. Odin would still be saying Thor risked war. And I realized that this would be an annoying cut, but I'm not sure how else you would get good Thor action into the middle of the movie. And that's where there's a huge improvement in the second movie. And I think also the third, but the third, you know, really in a lot of ways, the third kind of does what the first one does too. It's just not Earth, it's a different planet. But Thor's constantly getting physically dominated by others and being frustrated by it. He's stuck in this place when there's something that he feels he should be dealing with, and yeah. I didn't realize that before, after doing the video for it, and considering that, I just feel like it's too close to the first one, especially considering that the first one really wasn't that popular. If you're going to do the same thing again, I mean, at least when Iron Man 2 was so similar to the first one, it's because everybody loved the first one. And, you know, they caught lightning in a bottle, which really should have been the case with Thor. Anyway. Yeah, and I realized that it would sound as though he was exaggerating for Jane, and actually, maybe that should be it. You see the scene there at the start. Excuse me. I don't know what this thing's problem is. There we go. So, what's that? Yeah, you see the scene at the start, but it's significantly cut down. And maybe that's how it really happened. But then she asks what happened, and in retelling, we get, you know, the scene plays out the way it currently does there at the start. And the audience realizes he's exaggerating, but at least there isn't this drought of superpowered action. I realize the following is basically blasphemy. And I do want to note, I love him in the other movies he's in. And this is not something that I've been holding on to since 2011. it's something I realized one of the more recent, of between then and now, in rewatching this and then rewatching Avengers and then watching the second Thor movie and such. But part of me does really prefer the Loki in this movie to the ones in the next ones. The tragedy and drama are dominant. We don't laugh at Loki in this movie. There's basically, this is not a movie that has no laughs, or no laughs at the expense of serious characters, but there's not a single time where we laugh at him. We sympathize strongly with him, and when he's extremely, like when he feels that his whole world just collapsed around him, that he found out he's a frost giant. He's not actually, he's been told, like he says, I'm what we tell little children to fear at night, or whatever the line is, And then him letting himself fall there at the end, it's a perfect way to end this tragic character. I could have done it, Father, for you. No, Loki. And he lets go, and just, yeah. He wasn't always going to be in Avengers, as far as I know. And again, blasphemy, but part of me wishes that they had made a new character, one very similar to Loki, but leave Loki out of it. Let him have disappeared when he fell off. And I realized that the post-credits scene would be nothing like it is now. A huge strength of it is that it's Loki reappearing. But yeah, I don't know. I guess for then you would really have had to have like a third character who's like Loki Jr. or something. Not saying his son, but like a less the Zola to his Red Skull, I guess. A lesser, someone who's in the same basic direction, but not as far there, something like that. And no, that's not a spoiler. Yeah, in this, I only spoil Iron Man 1, 2, The Incredible Hulk, and then this. Anyway. Yeah, just, something like that. And then there at the end, he looks, he watches as Loki plummets and disappears. And then the post-credit scene, he's the one there, apparently like guiding, which I do think, I guess the idea is that he's, like Heimdall can apparently see what goes on in other realms. So I guess the idea is that he's using a Heimdall-like sight, and then he's also influencing Selvig. He's like almost looking through Selvig's eyes and feeding Selvig some lines. He literally said, well, I guess that's worth a look. And then with something like that, I do always feel like, what if you accidentally, like, well, yeah, there are tons of comedies that do, like, or, what if you accidentally say that, yeah, I just recently rewatched Out of Sight, and it's like, tell him, stay out there, you have to put clothes on. Stay out there, you have to put clothes on. I'm not ruling out possibly doing videos on that in the future. It's funny, charming movie. Doug Walker has said that he does, I forget if he did in the more, I think he did like videos on the Phase 1 movies in 2015. He did like new videos on them. I don't know, I don't watch him regularly. I rewatch the videos he did back when these first came out. Anyway, back when these first came out, he said this, and again, I forget if he dropped it for the 2015 ones, so I realize probably nobody else cares about this, and I can live with that. He said that he doesn't understand why they can't just repair Bifrost. you know, he said it in his own review and the Bum review, and it's like he thought it was such a compelling point that he would say it twice, and you know, just to make sure, you know, he said it in his own review just to make sure that, you know, that you didn't think it was just him pretending to be stupid for the sake of a joke in the Bum review. So yeah, when this came out, he said that maybe he's changed his mind since then. But my answer would be, they don't actually say they can't. You know, Thor says, "So the Bifrost is gone," to which Heimdall responds, "There is always hope." So Heimdall specifically says, "No, we might be able to rebuild it." Thor doesn't, because he doesn't know everything there is to know about, you know. And, you know, he may not have been built. He may, well, he is built like a brick house. He may not have been born yet when they originally built it, and the prologue kind of seems to suggest this. It very much appears that the army was transported using the Rainbow Bridge. I forget if I read the whole thing, but I think, and maybe it's not Andrew Bridgman, but I think he said about like the Thor Ragnarok that, you know, what, so Hela was just gonna transport her army one person at a time using the bridge? A lot of the time we see them transporting only one or only a few people at a time using the bridge. But clearly it is capable of transporting an army. That's what happens in the prologue of this movie. They are all suddenly just there. They were transported there at once, not one at a time. It just, sometimes people really get like upset. I also just recently saw someone like say, you know, oh, why didn't Shuri give T'Challa those, you know, ranged weapon things? You really think he's going to be able to hop around the way he does with those huge things on his hands? You really think he needs ranged weapons? That's a strength of his? I just, yeah. Second, it's possible that it was built from material that isn't common, or isn't common anymore. You know, there's only the one Mjolnir, and he says, you know, forged within a dying star. Well, who knows that the material for Bifrost isn't similarly, like, you know, what are they gonna go around, you know, carefully tracking down dying star, you know, killing stars just so they can get them to, you know, just, yeah. And also, just imagine having to rebuild the Great Wall. You know, it's not something just, yeah. It's this because today we live a life where everything is at our fingertips always. So a lot of people get conditioned into thinking that everything is always like that, and that everything is like that everywhere in the world. You know, just, yeah. Thor gives up his love for Jane twice, when he agrees to leave town after Selvig breaks him out, and breaking the Rainbow Bridge there at the end. To briefly expand on what I said in the old Thoughts video about the attempted genocide of the Frost Giants, the movie hasn't properly established that the Frost Giants are a real people. All we've seen them be is this violent force. You know, I'm going to try to avoid the Nazi idea of comparing a clearly intelligent species who we don't like to an animal, and genocide is obviously never alright. But if the Frost Giants are like a historic invading force, say the Huns, we're not going to sympathize with them as much as if there are regular people who you know, yeah, if there are regular people who long ago attempted invasion, you know, violent in the prologue. What the frick does this thing think it's doing? You know, if any nation that doesn't have violence in its history is too young and or too weak. There's no other way to explain that kind of every single, it's just, it's in our nature. We try to, you know, if you see someone else have something and you go to take it from them instead of asking them nicely, then it just instinctively, our lizard brain says it's easier for you to just take it, not always, but just, it's, yeah. I don't want to sound like the Terminator and Terminator 2 from the, violence is in your nature. No, just, it's the way I see it, it's something that every nation has to grow out of. There's some violence and aggression in their youth, and once the nation, once enough people have grown up with being told, oh yeah, we used to wage war, and then we realize that that's not the best way to do things, then you get to a point where you can accept, no, we shouldn't constantly wage war. It is something that we need to be taught not to do. That violence is not the, yeah. I'm gonna stop digging. Let's see. Yeah, when Thor shows up, something easy to use for this sort of thing is fleeing and or endangered women and children. And I don't have to tell this movie that, because it does use them. At the very start, we see human women and children running terrified, frozen by frost giants, which will kill them if they're not properly thought up. All the movie would have to do is show, some of them, women and children running away when Thor, lands, before he starts attacking, or they're at the very end when Loki, it shows some running away, but it doesn't, it's just showing the warriors, as far as I remember. I originally remembered it as there being women and children there, but I certainly didn't see them this time. I don't know. Maybe it should be clear if they are there, and if they are there, that's good. But again, they should be there when Thor arrives on Jotunheim, because the scene gets across that Jotunheim is left in ruin. They've never been able to recover. We don't know exactly how long has passed between the prologue and the main events of the movie, because we're just not told. But clearly, it happened before that's the thing, we don't know how fast these humans grow. We're told in the second one that they live thousands of years. What was it, 4,000 or 5,000 years? So, it would make sense that they don't age at the same rate as humans do, because that's a lot of years to spend as a really old, so yeah. But clearly it took place before they were even born, before Thor and Loki were even born. And that means that in all that time they haven't been able to rebuild. The scene gets that across, but it doesn't get across that they're, that they're a real people, that it's not just a bunch of warriors who will probably eventually, every time we see them in the movie, they're trying to cause the second ice age, or they're trying to get the thing back that was used to make another ice. It's a lot harder to sympathize with them now. Yeah, before Thor starts attacking, just show clearly that there are some people not just there to kill. I'm not saying it doesn't make sense. They're provoked enough to attack Thor once he comes in, although considering that it wasn't an invasion attempt and that they don't want war, it seems like they could have just said, clearly we weren't trying to invade, like Odin said, the actions of a few. It's just, yeah. But again, that's their characterization, and as someone who read these myths when I was a child, not believing them, but reading them, Yeah. Well, like, I mean, that's the thing. Is a frost giant the same thing as? I mean, if they come from Jotunheim and they seem to rule there, are frost giants the same thing as the Jotun? I don't know. I never heard them called frost giants before I watched this movie, but the Jotun aren't just stupid, constantly warring people. They're incredibly devious. Think Loki. You know, in the Norse myth, Loki isn't fully frost giant, Jotun. He's part, but that is where he gets it. You know, which is also, that's not really in this movie. He's devious before he knows he's a frost giant, and everything he knows about frost giants makes him hate them, including the fact that he is one. So it's not as though he got that. So yeah, I don't know. I don't mind that it's not like the Jotun of. I just, yeah, I think I've said what the. Let's see. You know, obviously, as Owen says, it was wrong to attack the frost giants. It would open up to war. You know, before the end of the movie, we're not told that it would be undue pain to the frost giants, only the Asgardians. That war. I think it was a mistake to not make the Casket of Ancient Winters more visually distinct from the Tesseract. Blue, glowy magic cubes that have a lot of energy that Loki shows at least some interest in. You know, it just... And maybe they hadn't decided that, you know, when they were writing the different movies, maybe they hadn't decided that the Tesseract would be in more than one of these movies, but still, you know, it's on the IMDb fact. You know, wait, how did, if for Avengers, how did the Tesseract get from, you know, from Odin's throne room to Earth? But and they just have to explain, no, those are two different things. You know, they look similar. I get that they don't have the exact same square shape, but they are both square. They glow blue, and not everyone does well with touching them directly. You know, it's, yeah, and both of them can be used to attack people, so it's not even that. Yeah. So that covers what I had to say, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did.